Hey, what is going on everyone? Mecha here and welcome back to the Fire Emblem character guides. Today we're doing Fire Emblem 4, Genealogy of the Holy War, one of my favorite games. I've already done guides like this for Thracia, the GBA Fire Emblem games, and most of the Tellius games. I was actually doing Radiant Dawn guides, and the next one that I'm going to do for that one is part 4 recommendations. The reason I am doing Genealogy right now instead of finishing off Radiant Dawn is I'm still on a Let's Play of Radiant Dawn, and I'm sort of close to getting to part 4 in my recording. So I figured it would be better to focus on some other games first, and after I've played part 4, I'm going to do recommendations of that. So that guide might be a while before it comes out. And the recommendations that I gave for Radiant Dawn will last you throughout the first 3 parts anyway. So I think for now, we're good on those. And instead, we're going to focus on Generation 1 of Genealogy. Obviously, I'm going to do a Generation 2 one as well, but Generation 1 should come first. No surprise there. So this is the guide that I would use for newer players who want to get into Genealogy or they just started playing and they want to know, first of all, what characters are just easy to use and good. And second of all, what makes the game less tedious, because I've seen a fair share of posts from newer players who get into Genealogy and they just find it too tedious to finish. They just get bored of it. They don't want to play it anymore. And I feel bad for them because I love this game. I think it's great, but it definitely has some pacing issues. And I think adhering to the recommendations here will give you a better time with Genealogy. I think a big part of what makes Genealogy so tedious is not just that the map take a lot of time, a lot of turns to complete, but moving every unit around on the field is what makes it so long, because moving every single unit from one place to another with the somewhat annoying UI of the SNES, I think that's a huge part of what makes it so slow. And Genealogy does allow you to use every single unit that you have, no deployment limits whatsoever. Everyone can just exit the castle and go out on the field. But if you have to move 20 units across the field, that's going to take a lot longer than if you just focus on a core team of 5 or 10 units, however many you want. So I recommend you don't use every character. And that said, obviously, like always, you can use all the characters in this game. This is a pretty easy Fire Emblem entry, especially once you've got the hang of the mechanics. But some of them take more effort than others. And generally speaking, the units that are higher up are less tedious to use and, of course, better as well, and just have stronger stats or better utility than the ones at the bottom. So I recommend focusing on the upper ones. And if you want to have a challenge, or you want to meme around a little bit, or you just like them, use some of the lower ones, because don't get me wrong, the units in high effort, they're still usable and they're still fun to use. I actually really like both of these. They're in my top 8 of bad characters that I find fun to use, which is a video I made long ago. And seen for these units in foot, I don't have anything against these foot units, but mounted units are a lot less tedious to use in Genealogy because they have so much more mobility. They have basically 50% more movement on top of the road tiles, giving them even more movement, and they can move after attacking. So they are just, in every way of the word, they are better. But in combat, these units are a lot fun to use. So, they have great, what Booty Bopper calls unit feel to them. They have all these kind of properties that make them fun to use. So you might still have a better time using these, but foot units do have a big problem in Genealogy, and they just take a long time to get to the field. Let's just get into the specifics, right? So we'll start at the top. Sigurd is a lord, a no-brainer. I think everyone knows how good he is by now. But just to give you an idea, he one-rounds characters at his joining time. He has the highest mobility of everyone, the highest durability, and the best offense out of everyone. He doubles everything with Pursuit. You can use the Silver Shirt you get at the end of the prologue. You can use Javelins and still double most of these slow axe enemies. He gets to do combat first. He's absolutely fantastic. There's no reason not to train or use Sigurd. His growths are amazing. He doesn't get reduced XP, even though he's promoted. So I think this is the best unit ever made, besides Robin and arguably Seth. There's no reason not to use Sigurd. He's absolutely fantastic. You should always, always, always use Sigurd. Even if you don't like him, actually, I think the game will become ridiculously more tedious if you don't use Sigurd, but I don't think anyone doesn't use Sigurd when playing this game. It's really highly recommended. Particularly for Chapter 2, the part with saving Lacaze and getting to the Heron Castle in time to save the villages and stuff. Sigurd is very helpful for that part in particular. So even though he starts out strong, I still recommend training him and giving him levels, because his growths, particularly in HP and strength, are really good, and making him more durable will make you give it a much easier time. The quickest, fastest, and easiest way to beat this game is actually to just not use any other characters for combat besides Sigurd. Maybe some cameos from some guys over here, but generally Sigurd is at base is capable of destroying everything. So That should give you an idea of how good he is. And the rest is using other characters is basically just flavor. It's a free choice. You're free to use other characters or not. I recommend doing it if it's your first playthrough, just because I think it's more fun to not solo the whole game. But if you want to try something dumb, just try doing a secret solo. You'll find it like it's actually like one of the fastest way to go through genealogy. Then we have Sylvia. She's the dancer of this game. She can revitalize 4 people's turns. If you put them in a neat little diamond and you put her in the middle, you dance for them all 4. That's super, super good. Always recommend using it. I think it's pretty easy to keep her out of combat in this game. For some of the other dancers, I find that the maps are usually more dense with enemies. They're like kind of spread around, so it's kind of hard to get her out of range all the time. But in this game, all the enemies are just kind of like use blocks of the same enemy, so it's pretty predictable where you can and cannot put Sylvia. So this is one of the best games to get used to using a dancer. So yeah, 10 out of 10 would recommend this every single time. If you can get the Night Ring on your first playthrough, which is kind of tricky, you have to save all of Lacaze's knights from Nordian Castle. But if they all stay alive, you get the Night Ring. I would recommend saving up money for her and buying that Night Ring if you can. It is kind of tricky if you don't know a whole lot about money management. I don't want to like go into like specific tips here, but at some point, if you want to like have her visit all those villages in chapter 2, or if you want to give her some money with Dew, then she can afford that Night Ring, and at some point maybe the Leg Ring to help her keep up, and that will make it easier for her to refresh 4 people every turn. I do really recommend Night Ring, Leg Ring Sylvia to a lot of people. That's like a pretty good way to make her even better, because if you're mostly using mounted units, then it will be hard for her to keep up with her 6 move against their like 8 or 9. Then we have good temporary. I put the Lancer units here. I put Quan, Finn, and Ethlin here because after chapter 3, they are no longer available. So they don't stay permanently on your party. But I put them up this high because I wanted to make sure that you understand that these are very, very good despite the fact that they leave. Quan especially kind of has the function of a Jagan in this game because he joins pre-promoted. Of course, Sigurd himself is pre-promoted, so he doesn't really have anyone to Jagan over. But either way, you can treat him a bit like a pre-promote in the fact that he's like not a priority to kill stuff with. At the same time, chapter 2 is a pretty hard part, and Quan is going to be one of the first people that gets into the action there, so giving him levels is still recommended. He doesn't get reduced XP either, so he's still pretty strong. Lack of pursuit kind of sucks though, so he doesn't like double unless he procs adept, which is not reliable at all. So most of the times he's going to hit really hard with his insanely high strength and stay alive with his high bulk. Don't worry about the weapon triangle disadvantage that he suffers early on. Like, sure, he uses lances against axes, but it's not a big problem for him. He takes hits just fine, as long as you remember to heal him up. Quan is very, very useful when you have him, and don't worry about like raising him like super high or anything, but definitely give him a couple levels for chapter 2. Finn is like the least temporary unit in the game if you think about it, because he's no longer available after chapter 3, but he does come back in the 2nd generation, as you probably know, so it's not a bad idea to raise him. I will say this right away, I'm usually not a big proponent of people who say you absolutely must promote Finn before he leaves, because I don't think you do. The game is perfectly beatable with Finn even at base level if you want to. It does help. It makes the game easier if he's at a higher level for Generation 2, but don't stress out over it. Just raise him as much as you want and just do whatever you want. I do recommend against pairing up with the people, though, because I don't think he makes a very good dad, and he will give away his inventory to his son, and none of the sons in this game can use lances, so that basically just cast them into the void, and you have to get them back through enemy drops in Generation 2. So I recommend you give any lances that Finn has, other than like a steel lance maybe, to Ernest or one of your other characters. And just leave him off with like a steel lance, maybe a javelin. Iron lance, he doesn't even need that one. You can just sell that if you want to, because he gets a new one. Don't worry about it too much, but I wouldn't leave like any rings on him, for example. That's not a great idea. And I would not pair him up in general. Again, the game doesn't become unbeatable or anything. You can't really soft lock yourself in genealogy unless you like really mess up your save files. By the way, save files always make a backup save when you're making genealogy. Make one for every chapter. Make one after he sees a castle, and have a 3rd save where you use the autosave feature. Always have backup saves, because this game doesn't have a restart chapter button. But yeah, I would recommend using Finn. He's very good in Generation 1. He gets the Brave Lance in chapter 2, which just lets him one around enemies straight up. And with his B rank lances, he's one of the few people who can use it, and he's one of the people that uses it the best because he also has pursuit. And his stats are pretty good in general. He doesn't have Holy Blood, but his growth are still like pretty fine all around. And Ethlin is your only mounted healer until you promote one of the other ones. So there's no reason not to use her either. And especially again in chapter 2, which is really the harder chapter in the game, I think, for newer players, is keeping your mounted units like topped off, or at least at high health, is very important. So having her around to heal people is super nice. For the most part, in Chapter 1 and Prologue, her healing will also be helpful, just less necessary, but really, really nice. In Chapter 2, I recommend swapping out her heal staff with the men's staff that Ideen has. That way she'll heal more HP. That can be kind of nice because her magic is a little bit low. Don't worry about promoting her too much. It can be helpful to promote her, but don't worry about it too much. Make sure you get the return staff from a conversation in Chapter 1 between Ideen and Ethlyn, because that is a really good utility thing. It really decreases tedium in Chapter 2 if you can return people to the home castle before you get to Augusty. No, that's the other one. Whatever one Macbeth is guarding, the one in the upper left. Returning people from there with Ethlyn is very, very helpful. I do recommend that. And before you leave in Chapter 3, like before they become unavailable, make sure she has like some things that you don't really care about but that are worth money. So something like a return ring or the pursuit band can be very good. Passing those down to her son can be very nice. I'm not going to like completely go into inheritance and everything here, but that's just like a general tip. I find that pretty helpful for giving Leaf a good inheritance. I would recommend that. I might make like a pairing video at some point, but this is what I have right now. Don't worry about Quan and his inheritance, by the way. Just don't worry about it. So yeah, these are units. Use them as much as you want in Generation 1 because they're so good, but be aware that they will leave after Chapter 3. Then we have good permanents, and these are units that I would recommend long-term for people. They stay all the way through the generation, but they do require some investment, unlike the no-brainers. So you can think of this as like the good investment tier, I guess. But this FE4 doesn't really have many units that are like good pre-promotes that don't need investment. Like basically everyone wants investment to stay viable. There's no one who you want to drop after using them for a while, I think. At least I can't really think of many. I mean, some of these units you could use and then drop, but it's not really highly recommended. But I do think they're a step above the OK tier, which I'll get into. So these are units I would recommend to anyone, basically. Lex is an Axe Knight that joins in the Prologue, and he has Paragon, which is super helpful for raising them quickly. Axes are a shitty weapon type, but Lex gets the Hero Axe at the end of Chapter 1 if you do like a secret event, which you might want to look up. I would actually recommend doing that. It's not fun to miss, and you're not going to discover it without trying for it. So just get the Brave Axe, send him to that peninsula, and get it. And you will be rewarded. Keep his Iron Axe on him though, because you need that for the secret event. And once he has the Brave Axe, he one-rounds a lot of enemies, unless they're like sword enemies, which you'll have like shitty accuracy against. For the most part, he'll just one-round things, as long as he's been raised a little bit. Super easy to use, becomes really tanky, thanks to his Near Blood, which gives him like 50% defense growth total. So really bulky unit. Kind of like Quan's level of bulk, honestly, very good. I remember when I played casually, like he was like one of the few units I would be able to promote at the start of Chapter 3, because double XP is just that good. And other than that, you just kill people. He's not as good in the first few chapters, but once you get the Hero Axe, he just really goes off. Actually, I think for a tier list, he's like arguably as good as Noish and Alec, just because of the weapon triangle situation and not having a good axe until chapter 1 at the end of it. But the Hero Axe, I think, makes him like so easy to use that I would recommend him to anyone. Very good. Medea is a little trickier to use, but still very good. And I initially put Medea like around here, but it didn't really fit. I think he's better here. Medea is like the ideal chip damage bot because he's a bow knight, so he can run in, hit something, and then kind of hide to a nice place, which is very convenient for bow users because you don't want to do enemy phase. So if there's like a boss you want to chip at, but you don't want him to stay in the way, then having him like hit from range and then fly away or move away is very useful. His stats are very unspectacular, actually. Like his bases are okay by FE4 standards. They'd be really good in GBA, but they're just okay by GBA standards. And his growths are pretty terrible. Like I've seen a lot of bad Medea level ups in my life. But his bases alone will let him double a lot of things. One important thing to remember for Medea is that inventory can be sold and bought by other units. A lot of people like Jamka because the killer bow is so good, and they find Medea weak because he doesn't have the killer bow. But you can have Medea buy the killer bow, and I would recommend you do it because he becomes a lot better with it. Between the killer bow crit chance of like 10% roughly at base, and pursuit and Accost, the skills that he just has a lot of chances to just get lucky against enemies. He's not going to proc like crits or Accost a whole lot, but it will happen occasionally. It will help you when it does. And because he doesn't take a counterattack, most of his attacks are just kind of free with no opportunity cost. Whereas if someone like Lex or Finn attacks, they might need healing. But Medea just doesn't take counterattacks unless he attacks like a ranged enemy, which I wouldn't recommend most of the time. So yeah, Medea is very helpful to have around for most of the game. He's most useful in the early game, but even in like Chapter 4, he can be useful against like enemy Pegasus Knights. So very, very good unit, would always use. But you could drop him if you wanted to, though. I wouldn't blame anyone for doing that, but I think he's good enough to be impermanent. Then there's Lacaze. She's definitely an investment unit. She joins at like level 2, and until she promotes at level 20, there's just not a whole lot she can do besides healing. But the cool thing about her investment, unlike someone like, I don't know, Nino or Est, she doesn't really have to do anything on the field to get good. She just needs to heal or spam return, and eventually she will promote because she does have C rank staffs. So what I recommend you do with Lacaze is you just buy her the return staff and just keep spamming return until she promotes. And then once she's done that, she's good to go. And depending on like how fast you play, that can be either during like chapter 3 or chapter 4 or even chapter 5. The point is, I recommend doing it at some point because her promotion is amazing. I don't actually want to spoil what it is because I think it's a really fun surprise for the few people who are unaware. Those of you who are aware, yes, I'm aware of just how good it is, but you'll find it magnificent when it happens. It's super, super, super hilarious and super dumb. One of the best promotions in the whole series, and I can't recommend it enough. Until she's promoted, though, keep her away from combat because she's not very good at it, but her stats will get really, really good. Then we have OK, and we have OK Mount and OK Foot. I actually do think the mounted units are better, but I made them the same color just to show that, like, yes, I appreciate how good at combats some of these units are. Azelle's the odd one out. I'll get into him when I get to him. But the OK Mount units is like categories like, these are mounted units, so that alone, I think, makes them viable and good. It's just you'll find their stats a bit more lackluster, or their combat lackluster. I could see a case for some of these moving up, though, and if this was a tier list, I would definitely move some of them like a little bit up. But this is like recommendations, okay? So Alec and Noish are, or I should say Noish and Alec, because that's the order they're in. They are the Christmas calves of this game, and a lot of people find them unimpressive, and I get why, because they just don't do a whole lot of damage beyond like chapter 1. They do have upper triangle over the brigands in the early game, which is very helpful because it gives them a truckload of avoid. They will generally just not get hit. There's like a 30% chance they will because of 1 RN, but generally you can count on them like dodging like 1 out of 2 hits at the very least. So they are very durable in that regard, more durable than someone like Lex or Finn, for example. And that can make them very useful. Once this advantage vanishes and you get into chapter 2 where most of the enemies use lances, you'll find the durability in offense becomes a bit more suspect and become harder to use them. And if you don't want to use them anymore at that point, I wouldn't blame you for dropping them. There are ways to make them permanently good. For example, Alec, when he promotes to Paladin, he gains quite a bit of magic, like 5 magic, I believe. And he's kind of borderline on one-running enemies with a magical sword. The same way, Noish, if you give him like a pursuit ring, which you can get in chapter 2 with a secret event using Arden. If you can buy that, then he kind of bypasses his need for, getting lucky, because Alec has pursuit, but he doesn't do as much damage. Noish has like good strength, but he only has a cost and critical for doing like bonus damage. So him not doubling is going to be a pain in the butt once like all your other characters start doubling things. But when you get the pursuit ring, you can give that to him, and then he can start one-running things. So that's one of the ways you can make him good. But clearly, it requires more effort. If you do it, though, they'll be about as good as like the good permanent units, though. So keep that in mind. Then there's Beowulf. He joins somewhere during chapter 2 as a free knight. He doesn't have the option to use the lances like the Christmas calves, but swords are still the best weapon type, so it's still a pretty good situation for him. His stats are, I'd say, roughly on par with like Alec and Noish would be at that time. He does have pursuit and a cost, so pretty good skill set. It's just by the time he joins, he's like a little underleveled, and training him is a little annoying. Not to the point that like Nino or Est or something like that. It's not super high effort, so that's why he's still here. Plus, he's mounted. Like, you can't really complain about a combination of having a horse, having pursuit, and having swords. And also, his promotion is really good. He gets like a lot of skill and speed, and he gains adept upon promotion as well. So a lot of multi-hit skills between like pursuit, adept, a cost, and even has the option of using like the hero sword. So generally, if you want to train Beowulf, you'll do just fine. It's fine. It's just he joins a little underleveled, and you might find he's too high effort. A lot of people find him boring as well. Same goes for like Alec and Noish. You don't really have that's like that bit of spectacular that some of these units have, for example. So that's why people don't usually recommend Beowulf very highly. But he's definitely worth buying at the very least, and then pairing with Lacaze at the very least. Even if you don't train him, no worries. Like, don't worry about training dads or moms of any pairings. The kids will come out fine even if you don't train them. The difference is very, very marginal. So he's still the best dad for Lacaze's children, for example. Then we have Ernest, and she's the Pegasus Knight. You might be surprised to see a flyer this low on a list of mine, but while I rate flying utility pretty high, in this game there's not a whole lot of it because she kind of falls behind, ironically. Road tiles in this game are not going to work on flyers, so she'll have the same move no matter what, where someone like Sigurd can move like 12 tiles. She'll only move like 8 per turn. This is usually compensated by terrain, but FE4, you just kind of have roads going from one castle to the next all the time. So bypassing terrain doesn't really change a whole lot other than like some parts of the game where desert or mountains are in the way. In those parts, you can be very useful, but for the most part, Ernest just kind of isn't very good for anything but saving villages that are far out of the way. And a lot of the maps are just kind of wide open, so not a whole lot of terrain to surpass. But there are situations where the flying is useful. And then she just has like a pretty good class and skill set overall. She has Pursuit. She can use both B lances and B swords. So Hero Lance, Hero Sword, or Brave Sword, whatever you want to call it. Those can all be used. She gets Staves upon promotion. And she gets pretty good magic upon promotion as well. So using something like a Wind Sword or Light Brand can work pretty well. I think she's a good candidate for the Strength Boosting Village in Chapter 3. And all that kind of stuff, so still like pretty good. I do think like these units are a bit better all around, but again, with the right resource management, these can be just as good, really. But I do think Ernest is like the most interesting out of these. So yeah, okay, foot. These are units that I think are really good at combat, like particularly in the offense department. But they're on foot, so moving them around from castle to castle just takes a lot longer. And if it takes a lot longer, it's kind of boring to just move them around from spot to spot. And if someone else gets to do combat earlier, I want to give them credit for that. So that's why I put the mounted units higher than these foot units. But all these foot units have something really spectacular going for them. So Azelle is really good offense. He joins in the prologue and he just doubles and one-rounds everything because he's using magic with pretty high magic stat and fairly high might too. He starts with fire, which a lot of people meme on because it makes him so slow, but he's still faster than the fire than the axe-using enemies that he faces, so he still one-rounds a lot of the bandits there. And once attack speed becomes a bit higher than enemies, you can give him thunder, so he keeps up with any speed generally pretty well. It's just his avoid isn't very good. He's pretty fragile all around, and he has 5 move, of course. 5 move is pretty shitty. Like, these guys have 6 move, but Azelle only has 5, and that's pretty bad. But on the plus side, he does promote, and once he promotes, you just put him in here, because then he gets some mounts. People that promote into a mount are very hard to tier. When I've got like one tier saying mount, and the other one says foot. But Azelle promotes into a mounted unit, into a mage knight. And once he does that, his offense is pretty good. You can give him a light brand because he can use swords. And that's a pretty optimal combo because it gives him weapon triangle over all kinds of enemy mages. So once he like becomes really good, once he promotes, he becomes really good. Doesn't that make him high effort? I don't think so. I think it's just enough effort to keep him out of there, basically. It definitely does take time. But like I said, the fastest way to play this game, the most optimal way, is just using Sigurd for the most part. So I can't really fault him for that too much. That's why he's in okay and not in high effort. And the returns on investment, once he promotes, are pretty good. But you'll find the first 18 levels that he has to go through are pretty painful. So that's why he's in okay. Ira is pretty well liked by a lot of people because she's fast, she has Astra, she has Pursuit, and she gets Adept upon promotion. She becomes a Swordmaster. Everyone loves female Swordmasters. They are spectacular in the arena. It doesn't translate very well to being good on the battlefield because of the lack of a mount and lack of durability, but no one will deny that Ira is just spectacular to use, really fun, and really overkill once she promotes. Like, everyone loves her. She's the recipient of the Brave Sword initially when you talk to her with Lexor Halon in Chapter 3. That doesn't mean it's hers only. In fact, I do recommend selling it from her and giving it to someone like Sigurd, or giving it to Noish or Alec or Beowulf, someone else who can use swords and has a mount, because they can one-on enemies with it too, but they'll be there more quickly. But because she gets the Brave Sword, a lot of people like using Brave Sword with her. And if you try it out, you'll probably see why it is, because she's like, if she gets Astra with the Brave Sword, she's hit someone 10 times. That's just how it works. It's insanely good, or at least it's insanely overkill. That's the point. Everyone is good with the Brave Sword, but she's overkill with it. So if you like overkill, go ahead and use Ira. It just takes a while to get her to the combat sometimes. Jamka is a bow user, so that means no enemy face combat, which is very annoying. But other than that, he's basically like an Ira with both, right? Bows, especially if you keep the killer bow on him. He one-rounds just about everything he faces. Like, if you thought Noish and Medea did that a lot, Jamka really showcases multi-hit skills really well. He has Pursuit at base, he has Adept, he has a Cost, and then if you keep the killer bow on him, he can also crit enemies. So even if Jamka by raw damage alone doesn't get to one-round an enemy, just one lucky extra hit and he'll usually do it because his strength is pretty good. I do recommend swapping him to the steel bow or later on the silver bow and keeping the killer bow on Medea, because I think they make better use of it. But there's no denying that Jamka is a multi-hit specialist and he can really work well in an individual round of combat. Of course, it's only going to be one round of combat most of the time because he doesn't fight on enemy phase and because he's using bows and because he doesn't counter at one range. So most of the enemies will just like hit him in the face and he can't do anything back, which is unfortunate. But I still think what he can do is good enough and easy enough to use to keep him out of high effort. But in tier lists, I would usually put Jamka in the lowest tier that I can of AV4. But that doesn't mean that his combat is bad. Like, he'll still kick ass in the arena. Then we have Halon, who's kind of like Ira. Like, both of them are just sword users that kill a lot of stuff. Halon is more bulky. Luna is not as spectacular as Astra. Like, Astra just hits someone 5 times at full damage, whereas Luna is just negates enemy defense, but it still is going to do like a magnificent amount of damage. And Halon does have like the better bulk, which means enemy phase combat is easier for him to stomach than for Ira. He can take on like a couple of free knights or a couple of cavaliers or something. Not like really strong bosses, those are like something different, but for the most part, Halon can take a couple hits and come out fine on top. And his strength is good enough to one round some enemies with like a steel blade. So pretty solid all around, but like I said, the problem is being on foot really. Still, he has pursuits, and that alone is worth mentioning. Then there's Lewin, another really beloved player, or really beloved unit by casual player standards, because, I mean, aesthetically, like, he's just a very pleasing unit with the whole color scheme going on. He's got wind magic, which makes him very fast, because they only weighs like 2. He's Elwin at base, and the first thing I usually notice about Lewin is the lack of pursuits, so Lewin just doesn't double enemies until he gets the pursuit ring. And then he has Adept and Critical, so there's like a chance he will proc one of those and usually one on an enemy because enemy resistance is just bad all around. Like, there's almost no enemies that will survive 2 hits from him, which means that he just has a chance to kill enemies. But knowledge the skill set is not very reliable until it gets pursuit. He also gets the Holy Weapon Forseti, which is just going to obliterate everything. It will increase the proc rates on the skills giant, like to a point where you're just always going to get it. And that's assuming he's not one-hit KOing an enemy, because with 30 might, of course he's going to one-round KO an enemy. As long as he has like the required magic. His promotion to stage is very good as well. It gives him a ton of magic, skill, and speed. So again, great at combat, can use staves as well once he promotes. Just really good all around, except the lack of pursuit and lack of amounts. Other than that, Lewin just doesn't really have any real flaws. But those flaws I just mentioned are pretty big, and for that reason he's on okay on foot. But note that, like, even though this is like the second or third lowest tier on the list, like the special effort, the special utility, and the high effort, like, this is really the only, like, quote-unquote low category that I have. Special utility is not necessarily worse than everything that goes above here. So keep that in mind. Like, even though this is one of the lower tiers, it's more like a middle tier than anything else. It's still like called okay for a reason. So don't feel bad about using these units, not at all. Then you have Bridget, another user of a holy weapon. Make sure to talk to her with Ideen in chapter 3. That's our joining chapter. Don't see Sylvia until you've done that, because then she gets a 30 might bow that gives plus 10 strength and just kills everything. But just like Jamka, the problem is here is using bows and being on foot, not being able to one-round things, because that goes just fine. Even in her joining situation, you can see her just one-round enemies on enemy phase a little bit. The game really tries to showcase that she can do that, which is pretty cool of the game to do, because her stats are just pretty good. It's just a lack of foot that makes her like able to, or the lack of amount that lets her murder everything in sight. If you give these units like the leg ring, for example, they'll be able to keep up. I still recommend the leg ring on Sylvia instead, because it lets like 4 units keep up at once rather than just 1. But a lot of people like using leg ring on one of these units and letting them help out in that way. So yeah, do with my recommendations whatever you like. Then we have high effort. These are the units. These are the only 2 units in this game that I would say in your first playthrough maybe don't, unless you really like them. They can work, they both have really fun advantages to use, but using them takes a lot of patience. Arden, I mean, the introduction says it all. He's strong, but he's very slow. He takes a lot of hits, his defense is high, his strength is high, his HP is good, but it just takes forever to get anywhere. 5 move is 5 move, and lack of pursuit means he doesn't double. He does get the pursuit ring eventually, which you can choose to keep on him, and then he does double, and he does have a B rank in swords at base, so he can use the hero sword and actually quadruple some enemies, which is very unexpected, but he can do it. And that makes his enemy phase actually kind of solid if you get him there. But of course, it will take time to get him there, because, I mean, I complain about these guys not having foot, or not having like more than 6 move, and Arden only has 5. And that stacks up over multiple turns, because Genealogy has a lot of maps where you just moving from point to point, turn after turn. And that means that a 5 move versus 6 move turns into 10 move versus 12, turns into 15 versus like 13. I'm not doing math right, am I? 15 versus 18, there we go. And that's not even like taking into account road tiles. So Arden will inevitably fall behind. You got to keep that in mind. But if he does get to combat, if you put him on like the bridge in chapter 3, once the pirates come out there, he can do some work there if you want him to. It's just, is it worth the effort? And the answer to that is probably no. But, you know, that's for like efficiency. If you think it's worth it for you because you enjoy seeing him grow, by all means, go put him there and go nuts with Arden because he's really fun to use. If you like having the patience. Same goes for Tiltu. A really fun mage to use. She has Wrath, so once she gets below half HP, you can think of her as having double the amount of attack that's listed. So if she has like, I think she has like 40 at now, like 30-ish at base, I think is what she's got. So you can kind of double that to 60. That's how much attack she has, because the crit is basically doing double damage or having double the might. So she has Thoron at base, which is 20 might, and that's going to be like really packing a punch. It's really fun to use against the pirates in a joining situation. Managing her HP, deciding whether to heal her or not with Claude can be interesting to say the least. So for that reason, I do recommend trying her out in the joining chapter. If you enjoy the way she plays there, then maybe keep using her. It's a little tricky because her joining situation is her best joining situation. That's where her 5 move and her low durability is going to be fine for her. But chapter 4, for example, is a lot of Wind Mages where she just doesn't hit reliably. So that can be a bigger pain in the butt to deal with. And that's before taking into account the fact she also has 5 move. And unlike Azelle, she doesn't promote to a Mage Knight. So there's no light at the end of the tunnel where she suddenly keeps up. She only gets 6 move after promotion. She does get stabs after promotion, so she can help with healing, but that's like the extent of her utility there. Wrath is also really fun to use in the arena, by the way. So even if she cannot make it to main field combat, at the very least, she can make use of Wrath to crit some enemies to death. So yeah, again, you can use these two. They're not super terrible to the point where you can't use them, but it does take more patience. And I do think like it takes more patience to use all these units than it takes to use like, I don't know, 5 or 6 and then a couple of high effort units though. So just keep a small team and you'll find the game not that tedious. Then we have special utility. These are units that I don't recommend training for combat for the most part, but I do recommend making use of their utility when the opportunity presents themselves. I actually put the healers here this time, which might be a bit odd, but hear me out here. But we'll start with Dew. He's a thief, and in this game, thieves steal money when they fight. This is very useful for getting money to people that don't have an easy time collecting money from the arena. So you can think of units like Sylvia, for example, that I mentioned earlier. Giving her a donation from gold can be nice to afford a leg ring or a night ring or both. Can be helpful for Lacaze to get her the Paragon ring to raise her faster. It can be helpful for anyone for that reason, but Lacaze is a good one because her promotion is so good. So that's what I generally use Dew for. His combat stats are very subpar. He doesn't have pursuit until he promotes, and he has a base in C and swords, and he just doesn't have any strength or defense or HP to speak of. So you got to be a little bit careful. But when you have the opportunity, stealing gold is generally worth it. You can also give gold to anyone else, whereas most people can only give it to their spouse. So Quan can give to Ethlyn, Ethlyn can give to Quan. But other than that, these units just can't give gold to each other until they're paired up. So Dew has that flexibility where he can give gold to anyone he wants to. Be careful though, because giving gold is an action that, first of all, it costs your turn, even if you're in the home castle. And second of all, you can only give gold like once, and then he just gives like all of his gold if you can, up to the like 50k gold cap. He'll keep the rest. So be careful with you do it. Like save with it and experiment with it to figure out exactly how it works. If you couldn't figure it out from what I just said, because it is like semi-permanent. You might want to keep it in mind. But yeah, gold management, I think it's fun, but it definitely adds to the tedium a bit. Then we have 3 units that all use staves. In general, the way I would recommend these guys is they have 5 moves, so they're never going to keep up with the main combat squad. But they can be useful for like healing or ranged healing. So you can give them like Physic or Fortify or Restore, which is a 10 range staff in this game. That can be helpful. Deirdre is only around for chapter 1 and 2 on the field, and I generally don't think it's worth walking her out there once you're in the main castle. I recommend just sticking Warp on these units. You can get that by talking to Deirdre with... I think it's, what's it like again? It's like Dew talking to Ideen in chapter 1. That's right. That's how you get warp on Ideen. Just use that to transport units between castles so you don't have to walk all the way. Once you've conquered a castle, you can warp someone to it, and that can save you a lot of time in chapters 2 and 3 for the most part. So what I usually do is I have someone return people home, like have Ethlyn or Lacaze return someone home, and then warp them somewhere else with Deirdre or Ideen if I need them at a different castle. Really useful in chapter 3 in particular, and that's the way I would recommend using Deirdre. Also, in chapter 3, Deirdre cannot leave the main castle, so I recommend you have her like sell all her things and give her gold to Sigurd so he can use that gold for whatever he wants, because Deirdre is going to be unavailable for chapter 4 and chapter 5, so just do that right away before you leave the main castle. As for Ideen, once you have the warp staff, just keep that on her or Deirdre, and just use her for staff utility whenever you can. But I don't recommend making a combat unit out of her, because even though she can do it after promotion, it's just not really worth it. Yeah, that's really Ideen in a nutshell. 5 move is 5 move. It's really annoying to work with. Claude is fortify base. You can use that on tilt you when she joins. And other than that, maybe use restore. If someone dies, you can use the Valkyrie staff with Claude to revive them. That can be pretty helpful, but not by any means required. Get him some money from the arena when you can. Like have him use a wind tome for a bit to get some money, but don't count on it like doing a whole lot, because neither of these have any skills to speak of. Like they just don't have pursuit, so they sometimes die horribly to physical enemies. But you know, they can get some gold from the arena, which is nice. So yeah, that's how I recommend using the healers. Heal whenever you can, and if you can't get them to combat, just don't. So in a nutshell, that's how I would recommend using the Generation 1 units in FE4. If you thought this was helpful, let me know. If you thought it wasn't, I mean, don't let me know so I can keep my ego intact. Other than that, look forward to the Gen 2 guide and the Radiant Dawn guide for part 4. And we'll also be doing Shadow Dragon eventually, as well as New Mystery and other games onwards. I'll see you around. Peace out. Goodbye. Love ya.